Hey everybody, some gadget guy here taking a look at the shooter on the Blackberry Passport, a step up from the Blackberry Classic we reviewed a while back. This square-ish hulk of a phone boasts 60 frame per second 1080p video. Starting off with some outdoor brightly lit shots, you just gotta love how buttery smooth the video is. It's almost unnatural seeing high frame rate video, and it's a nice effect coming from a phone. And that's the good news. The bad news is we're still dealing with a fairly low bitrate. Most scenes shot are between 15 and 17 megabits per second, or roughly half the amount of data per frame as what you might find on most newer Android phones shooting 60 frame per second 1080p video. This results in a fairly substantial loss of fine detail, like this arch covered in bougainvillea blossoms. Just a mess of smeared detail and altogether a very unpleasant representation. Stepping down to 30 frames per second does little to fix this problem. If there's a lot of tiny and fine detail in your shot, the intense video compression will likely blur or pixelate your scene. Color reproduction is fine for the most part, but we still run into some severe overexposing situations. There's no way to change up how the phone meters, so if one object in your scene is brightly lit, it'll probably clip and lose detail and brightness. All digital camera sensors can have issues with reds, but here the combo of overexposing and video compression artifacts results in a weird pinkish orange hue to what should be a very vibrant red. The focusing system feels really rubbery and sloppy. There's almost always a dual pulse through the entire focus range before the camera will lock on a subject. The phone actually does a pretty good job of auto-locking when you center your subject in the middle of the frame, but getting it to move focus to another item takes a sec. That focus is also easily confused at macro distances. As the video feature letterboxes on the square screen, it's already tricky composing your shot, but this system just does not like working close. Once you get close, it's often not worth the effort. Tiny details are blurred and colors are often washed out, even in shade. The camera is overexposing where it doesn't need to preserve shadow detail in the background at the expense of brighter details in the flower. When you can get it to lock at macro distances, the depth of field blur is actually quite nice. It's not as watercolor painting a blur as that found on a Samsung or a Lumia, but it is a respectable showing, though it does take a lot of patience to get the phone to work a shot like this. The zoom test here is pretty terrible. No pixel resampling that I can detect, just a crop in and blowing up a lower resolution image. Low bitrate pixelation and a lot of sharpening. Easily one of the worst performers we've ever run through this test. Now into a walking test, there is no hardware stabilization, so that super smooth video is picking up every single one of my footfalls. It'll be fairly easy to make viewers seasick at 60 frames per second, so I'll walk away from this test right about now. Onto a traffic scene, high frame rate looks awesome at capturing the movement of vehicles passing through the shot. Nice, crisp action. But the whole scene feels dull. Detail is dulled, where even the traffic signage is a bit blurry. The cars are a bit blurry. The colors feel drab. There's no pop to the blue in the sky, and not a terrific amount of dynamic range as brighter objects, not just white cars, clip. We see the same in our freeway shot, just altogether an unpleasant scene with the moire effect and all the leaves around the trees. Audio here doesn't suck though. A healthy amount of noise reduction, but we don't have that destructive warbling sound from cutting out too much info like you might find on an older LG, and tire noise can still be heard raking across our busted California highways. We also see solid performance on our transition test, moving from dark to bright and back. There's a twitchy or stepped quality to changes in exposure. It doesn't quite bloom, but the system is quick and manages those transitions well. There's a subtle shift in white balance as we hit sunlight, which I think is appropriate. And it's nice to see that while shooting 60 frame per second video, the camera doesn't seem to be overly tasked in responding to changes in lighting. Now for the nighttime shots. Well, all of the issues we had in daylight are compounded here by having less light. With street lamps on the scene, the camera is able to just barely hang on to this shot. On top of the low bitrate, we also see some noise reduction blurring the information even more on street signs. The action is still quick, but everything has a hazy or foggy, dull look. Moving to our creepy tunnel, we're pushing the limits on what this camera can do at 60 frames per second, and the noise is pretty ridiculous, but we don't see any streaking from taillights on the freeway. Though I do feel the Passport is subtly over-representing the blue of the streetlight here. Unfortunately, the noise doesn't reduce when you drop to 30 frames per second. Instead, the camera doubles the brightness and keeps the ISO at the same place. I would much rather see the same darker exposure and less noise thanks to cutting the frame rate in half and doubling the light. I'm never a fan of how much our phone cameras want to make every shot brighter than it really needs to be. Our creepy gate is just a mess. Blotchy, splotchy, noisy. We're really straining here to resolve an image and retain any detail. While I prefer this shot to be warmer, Blackberry software might be running too far in terms of white balance. This is lit by a really ugly yellow security light, but it's not quite this orange in real life. Of all the night shots, this walkway is one of the better tests represented. Clear color differences between the two white bulbs. The noise is bad, but the extra illumination is keeping full-on destruction at bay. Lastly, pushing this camera as far as it'll go, this obviously wouldn't look good on any camera as it's just way too dark and lit by horrible light. But what I found funny about lining up this shot is the phone had a much easier time locking focus on these tiny little flowers in near darkness than on any of my well-lit shots. Supremely frustrating and inconsistent experiences using this camera. So where does that leave us with the Blackberry Passport? Yikes. It is technically a better camera than the one found on the Classic, but I honestly think the Classic did a better job on about half the shots conducted on these tests. Blackberry does not make an easy camera to use unless all you want to do is lazily point a camera in the general direction of something and you don't much care what the resulting video looks like. This is not a fun camera to use. Perhaps the cardinal sin, that while composition is more difficult on the square screen, playback doesn't well represent what your videos will look like when you move them off the phone. I thought all of these shots looked a lot better while I was out in the field, and I was a little horrified to see what they actually looked like on my desktop monitor. I really don't like panning a product, but outside of the Kyocera Brigadier, which just couldn't complete our nighttime tests, the Passport has one of the worst cameras I've reviewed on any phone, let alone on phones positioned for flagship consumers. I love Blackberry hardware and communication tech, but they really don't know cameras. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more videos like these, and I would not be able to continue producing on this channel if you all weren't out there sharing my reviews on social sites like Twitter and Facebook and Google+, and the Reddit, so please keep bringing more cool people to the party. Hit that thumbs up button, and I will catch you all on the next review.